Hello, I'd like to welcome our virtual audience to the fourth Fearless Conversations event, a collaboration between the Advertiser and Flinders University. It's about being brave in our thinking about how we drive South Australia forward in the future and challenge ourselves to position this great state for success in the future. There will be a series of fearless discussions over the panels over the next 10 weeks on topics such as high-tech innovation, infrastructure, health and more. For each, we've assembled a group of thought-provoking leaders to explore their views on the opportunity and challenges we face in relation to each topic. Today, we explore the wine and tourism industries and how it will influence South Australia now and in the future. Feel free to join the conversation through Twitter using the hashtag FearlessConversations or in the comments section on advertiser.com.au. I'm Brad Crouch, journalist with The Advertiser, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion and encouraging our guests to be brave as we talk about wine and tourism. They're two of my favourite things. They conjure up the idea of a party, but both have a serious hangover at the moment. We'll explore how to get through that. Before I introduce today's panellists, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to their elders, past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. Today we are joined by, from my left, Andrew Kay, Chief Executive of the renowned Wirra Vineyard and a former Director of the Winemakers Federation of Australia. Roberta Crouch, a Professor of Business Management providing academic leadership in teaching and research across numerous business disciplines at the College of Business, Government and Law at Flinders University. With the launch in April 2020 of the Bachelor degree in International Business, Wine, Spirits and Tourism, Roberta leads the Flinders Wine Business Program. Peter Williams, long-time Chief Executive of the much-awarded travel agency Phil Hoffmann Travel, repeatedly named Australia's best travel agency. And Corrina Wright. With cousin Bryony Oliver, Corrina is the leading voice of the Oliver family's sixth generation of McLaren Vale winemakers and the impetus behind their own wine label, Oliver's Taranga, which Peter told me just before we started is a pretty good drop. So welcome all. It seems just 5 minutes ago, these were South Australia's two boom industries setting records. Then the pandemic hit, international and state borders shut, China imposed punishing tariffs on our wines, and the survival buzzword in both industries became pivot. Andrew, if I can start with you, I understand tariffs of up to 212% imposed by China saw our $700 million export market there plunge about 37%. So what wine export market should we be targeting now?
Yeah, I think the conversation around China is an interesting one because I think we need to shift the narrative from the fact that there's this perception that everyone was marketing to China and nowhere else. You know, most wineries that have been exporting for many years have spread that risk or that load across a number of markets. Sure, there were some that embarked upon China for their first ever export experience and some that existed purely to service China. But we've seen markets like the UK bounce back quite strongly during COVID. There's markets like Malaysia, the Southeast Asian markets are performing quite strongly, South Korea, Singapore, Canada, are still markets that have held up quite strongly during that time. So, I think if wineries have purely existed for China, they've got some work to do and they've got the work cut out because there's not one single market that will replace China. It has had a lot of its own unique opportunities you won't get anywhere else.
Corrina, still on that, what do you see as promising emerging markets? We're already selling to the UK and we've got a strong relationship there. But are there new ones that are just coming up on the horizon?
Yeah, well, some of the ones that AK mentioned, in particular, South Korea seems to be the most interesting one at the moment and also the one that's seen the most growth just recently in these last sort of quarter. But Vietnam, Thailand, other sort of markets like that are that Southeast Asia sort of area. They seem to be the most interesting. But then there's also the old UK and the USA. The USA is a tricky one. It's like selling to 50 different countries. Over there, they have quite a tricky system, but there's a lot of potential.
So there is pivot room in the industry, isn't there?
There is, and like AK said, it's all about how exposed you were. But a lot of us also perhaps weren't as exposed as wineries selling our wine there, but the grape growers as well. So you've got that grape growing industry who may be selling to some of the big players in China.
School kids get into these areas. Is there a jobs career path there ahead?
Oh, there certainly is. It's an interesting statistic that domestic tourists spent more overseas when pre-pandemic times than all the inbound tourists used to spend. So there is that captive spend here. Now we were just discussing that we haven't really felt the full impacts of the economic impacts of COVID, but there is still a lot of spend left. And this industry will certainly bounce back. And there is scope along a really wide value chain, everything from the grape growing sector all the way through the cellar doors, but also in hospitality and in import and export businesses. So there is huge career potential, and people are looking for skilled people. And if we are able to educate people who are in the industry now, but also school leavers coming up, there's lots of career opportunities nationally and internationally.
And these are skilled mobile jobs that you can take interstate and overseas and have a good
anywhere
career?
In the world. When I was working in France, I used to manage a wine business education program there, and we had students from around the world, and they worked around the world. They were easy to employ. We used to have the likes of, Louis Vuitton come and recruit our students. So it's an exciting industry with lots of choice, and it now is probably the time to get ready for it. So there's no need to hold back and think, this sector is doomed. Far from it. The sector is going to bounce back stronger than ever. And if you are in a position to take advantage of that, you'll be in the running for some very exciting careers.
And just while we talk about bouncing back, we've had boosts to the industry, like the Great State Vouchers, the Tourism Industry Development Fund, Regional Event Fund. Some more packages were announced earlier this week just to get us through till that bounce back. Is that enough of a support to keep the companies that are hanging on till the bounce back?
I guess it depends on how resilient they were in the first place.
Right.
So if you have companies that were in a fairly strong position, then they're going to be, like any business in any stressed situation, they're going to come back. They're going to be in a better situation to do that. However, if they were vulnerable already, then maybe not.
Yep.
But in any shakeout, the better operators and those that are able to diversify, come up with new ideas, take advantage of changing desires, I suppose, then they're going to be able to take advantage of that. And if you're not in a position to do it, then like in any shake-up situation, and we see that a lot across lots of sectors in history, then you're probably not going to survive it. That's the sad truth.
All right. Peter, Phil Hoffmann Travels helped thousands and thousands of people off to dream holidays overseas in the past. Cruises, escorted tours, so forth. Once vaccination rates reach a certain level, how fast do you see a bounce back as pent-up demand across all age demand an overseas holiday, and they've got the money they've been saving to go?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brad, and there's no doubt there's pent-up demand. I think one of the challenges we've got moving forward is a supply issue, because at the moment we really do not have a lot of supply coming in and out of Adelaide for international tourism. So if you look at the airlines at the moment, we've only got a couple of airlines, international airlines, that are committed to flying in and out, and that's Singapore Airlines and Qatar Airways, whereas we've worked really hard over 20 years to get airlines like Emirates Airlines in there, Malaysia, Cathay Pacific, Air New Zealand, etc., and none of them are really fully committed at this stage. Now, I think they will come back, but obviously it's demand driven, so we have to wait and see. I think what we really need is a clear pathway, so these suppliers can plan medium and long term, because short-term decisions that they just can't be made in the aviation and the cruising industry. For example, we're right in the middle, or we're about to start on what we call the cruise wave season, which is traditionally from October through to March, where we enjoy lots of visitations from international cruise ships into Outer Harbour, Kangaroo Island, Port Lincoln. I think we're up to about 125 pre-COVID, and that was up from 14 only about 10 or 15 years ago. So you can see the growth trajectory is there. But of course, they need to plan months, sometimes years ahead. And unless we've got a clear pathway, then it's very hard for that planning. But the demand's there. Supply is going to be our issue moving forward.
So does that mean, particularly with airlines, we've become so used to cheap airfares, like dirt cheap compared to 10, 20 years ago, cheaper than they were then? Are airfares going to be expensive?
I don't think so. Look, we just saw only last week Qatar Airways put some sale prices through to Europe into the market for exactly the same price as it was pre-COVID, starting at about $1,400. Look, they really want to get passengers onto the aircraft. They need to get the whole tourism industry moving again. And as we were saying before, I think we need a balance between inbound and outbound. You can't have, this thriving inbound tourism, which everyone around here needs. We need them to come in for the visitation into South Australia. But unless we've actually got people heading out of the state and travelling internationally, those planes, they're going to be empty. So we need to attract those airlines back, because if we don't, they'll just miss out on South Australia totally, and the wineries will miss out on their visitations and their visits to the cellar door. Yeah,
Corrina and Peter, this affects you directly. Sure, it's interesting to see people wanting to travel overseas, and you're thinking, oh, well, they're spending their money over there. But the airlines aren't going to come here bringing loads of people here unless it's two-way traffic. You guys would have to be supportive of boosting that air traffic?
No question, absolutely. The domestic markets held up very well. After the lockdown last year, there was quite a boom in regional tourism, and I think we all saw it, whether it was the Barossa Valley, the McLaren Vale, where we're from, the Coonawarra or the Adelaide Hills. Since this most recent lockdown, it hasn't bounced back in the same way. So I think we're certainly keen to see interstate visitors heading back here.
We had a lot more people come back here from the eastern seaboard who thought we weren't cool, I think, and they've gone, my God, these wineries and this food that we have here in our regions is just amazing, and the vibrant city that we have in Adelaide. So I think that's been one positive.
All right,
you have to have a real state border, consistency there, because these snap lockdowns that we have, people really get scared that they're going to be stranded. And I think, to Andrew's point, May, June, we saw a bit of a bounce, but then with the latest round of lockdowns, even though most of the country is open other than New South Wales and Victoria, people are very reluctant to travel because they're worried about those snap lockdowns and, am I going to be stranded? Am I going to be away from my family, or can I not get back to work?
Sure. That brings me to one of the big vexed questions at the moment, COVID passports for tourism businesses, from wine tastings to international travel to you name it. I think the UK is backing away from them a little bit. Andrew, can I start with you, because I understand Wirra has plans for a boutique hotel, which sort of extends. Do you see COVID passports as inevitable, or where do you stand?
Where do we stand? It's a good question. I think we're going to see more and more the reality of people needing to be vaccinated to attend major sporting events, major festivals. The Adelaide Festival's already talking about that. The Fringe is already talking about that. So it's going to become more and more mainstream. Whether it becomes a COVID passport or something similar, I think in some ways it's inevitable.
Will you introduce it to Wirra?
We'd certainly be very keen to see where the market heads with it.
Right.
And again, I think it's too soon to say. We need to know what it looked like.
Yep.
But I think it'll be something we'll all be faced with, and it has that degree of inevitability.
Corrina, can I throw it to you? Will you introduce it?
It depends on what's happening with the industry. I feel like it's going to be imposed upon us rather than us imposing it.
Yeah.
So, I don't really want my staff to have to be a policeman, obviously, and no one does. But I agree with AK. I feel like it's going to be inevitable.
Roberta, your thoughts?
Well, I've just finished a couple of research projects with potential American tourists, and COVID has changed the way they prioritise what they're looking for in a destination. We measure a thing called destination attractiveness. So how attractive does a destination look to you? And then how does that impact on your intention, if you could, to visit it? And one of the drivers now is the perception in people's minds of how well COVID is controlled in a destination. So that has a huge impact on how positively, emotionally people feel about travel, because people think about a place, they have an emotional reaction to it, and they have what we call like a rational reaction to it. What do I think rationally will be there for me when I get there? And does it make me feel happy or scared or whatever it might be? And driving both of those things now is this perception of how well have they controlled COVID in this place? Are the hospitals good? Is the infrastructure good? What's the vaccination rate like? How many people have died there? And how serious are they about protecting citizens and visitors? And when that's high, that has a very positive impact all the way through to intention to purchase. And the moderator on that is how fearful people are personally of COVID. And that can be amazingly high, even amongst people who are vaccinated. So where I'm getting to in that is the psychology of consumers will drive, I believe, the COVID passport. They're not, an executive Virgin the other day was heard to say, I was watching her, those that are not vaccinated are the new smokers. So they'll be off on their own somewhere, and people aren't going to work with, I believe, for a while, for probably quite a while, because people can still get COVID and pass it on once vaccinated. They're not going to be sitting with people who aren't vaccinated, working with them, being served by them. And so I just believe consumers themselves will probably want to feel, that's what the research is saying, will want to feel they're safe and comfortable, and that then allows them to get the best of a tourism experience.
Yep.
And that will be that sort of niggling worry in the back of their minds if it's not there. So, yes, I think the answer is yes, they will.
Peter, it almost becomes a redundant question in terms of both flying in and flying out. If the airlines say you have to have a
Correct.
COVID passport, so we'll have a point with international tourism. You have to have one whether you like it or not.
I think it's inevitable. Absolutely. Look, we've already seen, Alan Joyce say that, you're not going to be flying Qantas internationally unless you're, fully vaccinated. And, what we're seeing now is, the airlines really, they're going to mandate it. You can see it. There's an international travel vaccine passport about to be supported via an app. And you're basically going to have to, show it before you get on board. There'll be a QR code. The international COVID passport will be linked to your physical passport. There'll be, a QR code, same thing. So I just think it's inevitable. And look, it probably is a vehicle where, it's going to be good for the industry overall. At the end of the day, it's going to give us this vehicle to enjoy large scale, international operations again.
And again, inbound and outbound.
Inbound and outbound.
And it'll also be handy for people, I guess. You go through Europe, you go to half a dozen different countries, and there might be different rules at different hotels and
Absolutely.
restaurants and whatever. It's basically something you need in your back pocket.
Yeah, this is going to be internationally recognised, so there's no doubt about it. So it will give you some sort of freedom as you're moving around.
Yep.
And it will obviously give the authorities something to check to say, look, double vaccinated, here's your freedom versus not vaccinated.
Yep. Just bouncing back to wine for a moment. Andrew, we talked about emerging markets and those sorts of things. Are we at a situation with China where we're seeing vines being pulled out at all, or people leaving the industry, anything of that nature?
No, we're not. We're certainly not seeing anything as extreme as vines being pulled out. What we're probably seeing is some growers transitioning out of the market or reducing their exposure to the market. And what's been interesting certainly in McLaren Vale, Corrina would have seen this as well, is that some smaller growers are taking advantage of the residential property boom. So vineyards that typically would be marketed as commercial opportunities are being sold as lifestyle opportunities. And they're appealing to expats who might be living overseas or people living in Sydney and Melbourne who are looking at South Australia saying this is a pretty attractive proposition right now. I can come and live in this beautiful part of the state, now hour from the city, 5 minutes from the beach, on my own vineyard. And we're seeing that being the way that these vineyards are now being marketed. And there's been a number of opportunities like that presenting themselves in McLaren Vale in the last couple of months.
Corrina, do you see, especially for smaller family-owned wineries, do you see this will spur diversification of what they're doing? So if they've been relying on exports, they might be thinking, well, I need to branch out and have other offerings to get more passing traffic, if anything.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's some pretty significant investment in cellar doors at the moment. So, some of that, most of it probably was planned prior to COVID actually happening, because we were starting to see a real ramp up in wine tourism and the popularity of McLaren Vale and our regions. So that most of that has continued to happen, which is really lucky, and probably the SATC grants and some of the regional development grants were really helpful in that. Also, we're seeing just this real diversification into online. So, wine industry, perhaps has been a little bit slow to pick up the online space, and that's really grown significantly. In particular, the sort of growth of subscription clubs, which are pretty much no-brainers if you want to get wine delivered to your door on a regular basis, and the clubs are becoming much more flexible these days, and that's been a real key driver. So while we haven't been selling much export perhaps, or to restaurants obviously when they've been closed, the online space has picked up, and probably a lot more skills in that area. Some of the skills I'm hoping you're going to give us, moving forward is a huge area for us.
Okay, we mentioned emerging markets, different markets bouncing back, and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of other nations that export wine, and it's good wine. We've got terrific wine, so do some other countries. How important is our clean green image for our international sales? Roberta, do you want to take that up?
Well, first of all, I would dispute necessarily that we have a super green, clean image. New Zealand owns that.
Okay.
Although what image we do have that is important going forward is we are known to be authentic, and honest and bold and exciting and trustworthy. And Wine Australia funded that research that I led a few years ago, and that's really important, and that will help us unbelievably. People believe that when you basically deal with Australians, they're going to do what they say, and they'll be honest about it, and they'll be honourable about it, and the wine is at a consistent level, so we might not be necessarily clean and green, but we're clean in a business sense, I suppose. People like to do business with Australians, and there's been lots of research undertaken in particular by Wine Australia on that. And that is something I think that's going to become more and more important as we go forward, because, we talk about the China incident or the China situation. The geopolitical world is very turbulent at the moment, and there's going to be opportunities for us to do more business that Australia is happy to do business with. And you've mentioned some of the countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan. It's probably time to go back and revisit Japan, which is has been sleeping for a long time. And so there are lots of opportunities where our image will really hold us in good stead and be an advantage over other countries.
Does that image flow through to the actual label when the bloke in the street in Japan or Taiwan, South Korea is looking at different labels, goes, oh, that's from Aussie, they're authentic, they're trustworthy, they're good blokes?
Yeah, it does.
Good ladies?
It does.
Okay.
What we could do a bit better in that score, though, is we could, maybe drop some of the really overt cliche Australian imagery, which doesn't do us a lot of good.
Kangaroos.
Yeah, they know we've got those. We don't need to keep telling them we've got those. The research, again, is pretty clear on that. It's time for us to really take advantage of the sophisticated wine industry that we have. It's leading edge, cutting edge. We make terrific wines, and we basically, I'm sure Corrina and Andrew would agree, we should get more money for our premium wines.
We certainly should. I think the thing around clean and green is it's more the expectation that you're going to be sustainable and environmentally friendly is almost a license to play now. So you need that as a starting point. And if you're dealing with international markets that are run by monopolies, by government monopolies, which most of the Scandinavian markets are, that most of the Canadian markets are, if you're submitting wine for a tender now, you'll get this checklist that you need to be able to tick off to be able to submit for the tender. And often, is the wine vegan? Do you grow your fruit sustainably? these are the sort of questions I'll be asking as part of the tender process. So that license to be able to play is part and parcel of what the sustainability or the environmental piece is. And as an industry, we're moving towards a trust mark around sustainable wine or sustainable wine grape growing that we can put on our labels and we can share that internationally.
Yeah, I think it's key. We're also lots of small family businesses that are custodians of land that we it's really important to us. So being sustainable and acting in a sustainable way, not just environmentally sustainability, but also social. We live in regional areas and we're often big employers in our regional area, and so we have a social responsibility in our regions to contribute to our community. So I think there's that social responsibility piece as well as the economics, sustainability piece.
Well, on both of those, social responsibility and economics, I cover the health round as one of my other hats for the paper, and there's not a week goes by where I don't get an email from a medical group, a lobby group, activists, whatever, sort of saying, too much alcohol, we've got to cut alcohol. The head of the AMA said there's no safe alcohol level. How do you balance that fine line between responsible, enjoyable drinking of our great wines with this idea that, you've got to sell a lot of wine to make a profit?
Yeah.
You want to take that?
I think the industry, there's a few checks and balances in there. Firstly, we self-regulate very well, and we also have regulations around us. But the industry promotes the consumption of wine as part of a meal or part of an occasion where food is present.
Yep.
And that's something that I think has long been the position of the Australian wine industry. And there's also some health benefits around the moderate consumption and safe consumption of wine as well. There's restrictions around how you can advertise and promote wine to ensure that it's not seen to be making a situation or an occasion better through the consumption of wine. It doesn't make you a better singer or dancer, believe it or not, and any funnier or more attractive to the opposite sex. And all these things are checks and balances that are in advertising.
Right. And
we've self-regulated through pregnancy warnings on labels and other means that we do quite well as well. So I think as an industry, we're very well aware of the role the anti-alcohol lobby plays, but we're certainly conscious of our responsibilities in that space as well. And we're seeing big growth in what we call the no-low sector of reduced alcohol or zero alcohol wines, just as we've seen it in beer and spirits as well. And there's a lot of wineries starting to play in that space as well.
Okay.
Yes, just going on to that, absolutely. It's a huge opportunity for product development and diversification because it is a huge sector in terms of its growth or potential growth, but there's also the advantage in from a psychological consumer perception that if you provide a lower or a zero alcohol wine product, that you're in that space, and so it can do a lot for your brand from a social responsibility perspective to make that offer in addition to your regular alcohol level products.
A question in on Twitter from Damien. He's asking, other industries have innovated through the pandemic to survive. What's tourism implementing in order to survive? A pretty broad question, but...
Well, first of all, I guess what we had to do is, when it first came out, the restriction on trade was immense. There was nothing we could really sell, come back March of last year. So, and then bit by bit, things started to open up. Our state opened up. We could start to move around our state. Now, Phil Hoffmann Travel, we're not really known for selling Victor Harbour or, local Clare Valley or down to McLaren Vale. But of course, we had to do something. We wanted to try and get through this the best we could and hold on to our skills and our resources and our valued staff. We employed 220 odd staff before the pandemic. So we started pivoting, that horrible word that we probably don't want to ever hear again in a few years' time or a few months' time. And then domestic travel, again, probably travel agents weren't known for selling a lot of domestic, maybe more complex and maybe high-end domestic, but not the point-to-point and really basic holidays. But again, we had to get involved, and we did with Tourism Australia, and so we started to pivot around that as well. So not only intrastate, but then interstate, and then we just built from there. And as I said earlier on, it was going along quite nicely, and but the last rounds of lockdowns has really hurt us. So that's kind of the best we could do, given the restriction on our trade to sell international travel, and hold on to our resources the best we can.
And we've seen that play out down at our level as well, in terms of providing more experiences that sort of saleable products, I suppose, and making sure that wine tasting flights or vineyard experiences, or fly your helicopter in and do something really flash, or all of that sort of stuff has started to pretty much all wineries now are starting to build on those experiences, which is bolstering that.
Yep. And people were after those experiences, and you'd package that up with a couple of nights of accommodation and, some wine tasting and a nice meal and things like that. And that was something we hadn't previously offered, but, the appetite for it was very good.
Okay, so there's always opportunities and challenges, aren't there?
Yeah, look, and we're very appreciative of being able to do that. But of course, then we want that balance, and we want not just the local tourism, but, we need the interstate tourism, just like the wine industry needs it coming in, filling their cellar doors during the week rather than just the local tourism on the weekends. And then, of course, we know what international tourists do to our economy. They, the amount they spend is huge. So it's a balance of all three. And we're looking forward to that getting better in 2022.
We were talking but some months ago now, I guess, about travel bubbles, and New Zealand was going to be the first travel bubble and all the rest of it, and then the wheels fell off. Once we get to 80% and a lot of the rest of the world has increased vax rates, are we looking at bubbles, or is that the thing that we've moved on from?
It's a really good question, because I think the travel bubbles are still here for a while, even though when we hit that 80%, I think the government have a real appetite to look at countries based on their risk profile. And you're going to get these green zones or green lanes. And, New Zealand was the first one to kick that off. Now, it was short-lived, only lasted for a few weeks, but it was good while it was there. And we expect New Zealand to be up and about again before the end of the year, along with a couple of other green zone countries. So it could be a Singapore, it could be, Vietnam, most likely some of the South Pacific islands as well. And this is where there'll be minimal quarantining when you come home.
Yep.
Okay, so it might be home quarantining, or it might be taking you quarantine until you get a negative test. And then outside of that, the freedom to move around to all other international travel probably won't start until into 22 sometime. And then there's going to be more stringent restrictions when you return. So again, we're hoping that it's going to be home isolation with testing, but more than likely you're going to be there for 14 days. So I think the bubbles to those kind of safe and those green countries is going to be around probably for the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. Roberta, has COVID had an impact on what people now expect from a holiday?
It has, and mainly due to the fact that, and for some considerable time, people will have less time to plan, or they will take less time to plan. So they'll be looking for travel bubble opportunities. They'll be fearful that those could be shut down at any time. That's what the last 2 years almost has taught us. And so they're thinking, I want to go on a holiday. I'm not sure where. I'll see where I can go. I'll see what's available to me. What my employer will expect of me in terms of working from home on the way back. So there's all parties involved in a holiday decision now, instead of just you or your family deciding. So what they seem to be looking for from the research that I've just done in the States is reducing their risk of pain rather than experiencing all of their holiday goals. So again, the driver is, how safe am I going to be when I'm there? If I do get sick, what are the implications of that? What will it be? How will my country consider my visitation there when I get back? And while I'm there, I'm going to be more concerned about minimizing a bad experience than self-actualizing. And this was interesting because it was the same. We did the study looking at people perhaps going to an iconic place like Paris, Australia, and then what we thought would be a higher risk area, like the pyramids, which is on a lot of people's bucket list. But it was really consistent. So I think in marketing going forward, good operators will talk about providing some comfort in those areas. And that's, again, ticks back to the COVID passport.
Correct.
You know, and people's confidence will be built through these travel bubbles, I think. And once they get another couple of overseas trips under their belt, they'll get back in the swing of it. But in the immediate future, it's going to be about them feeling that they can go and have a good time and get through it without a bad experience. And that's really a very challenging marketing position for destinations to be in.
Yeah, but I think the government also, they have a responsibility here as well, that they have to give us clear guidelines on what those restrictions are going to be.
Yes.
So if you're travelling to, let's say, one of the bubble countries, this is what's going to happen on return. If you travel outside of this is what's going to happen. And I think if you can give people certainty, then there'll be no issues. But every survey we do, I agree with you, Roberta, is that health protocols, safety is coming up as number one. And then number two, distance, is around the experience. And so people want to know that they're going to be safe, and they want to know what's going to happen when they return. And I think the government have got a real responsibility to tell us that.
That idea that I've been on trips where you go to work the next day or even the same day.
Yep.
In some cases, this idea that you might go away and then suddenly find out, well, when you get back, you're going to face another 2 weeks quarantine, and your boss might not be too happy. That's a significant deterrent, isn't it?
It's a demand buster. It really is. And if that continues, then you know that the sector is really under threat for really what we see as a third year. This will be our, going into 2022, this will be our third year without a kind of a Northern Hemisphere travelling season, which will be, you'll just see, I think there's something like 600,000 jobs already gone in the sector. There'll be a lot more if we don't get a Northern Hemisphere travelling season away. So that's where the government responsibility comes back to it. And if it's deemed as a safe country or a green zone, then this is the restriction, which we believe should be down to just having a quick, staying at home, quarantining until you get your test done, and then you're free to go. And then if you choose to travel outside, then you have to understand what the risks are when you come back and the restrictions are.
Roberta, have we seen examples elsewhere of assistance and innovation that's helped travel industries recover and grow?
Well, I think I'll go to what Andrew and Corrina have talked about, and it's these hero experiences. So people have got money, and instead of, taking that 25th wedding anniversary cruise, they hire a venue all out themselves. They have people come in a hot air balloon and be greeted with, the best sparkling and beautiful food when they get there. So these hero experiences have just been amazing learning opportunities for the industry and the sector. And those will continue, and they'll be big attractions for our overseas visitors when they come back. And I think the other thing that COVID has promoted and lifted capacity in, although there's still some room, there's always room, is in using digital technology. The virtual tourist. I did a study years ago on virtual wine tastings, which, 7 or 8 years ago, industry wasn't that interested in. And then all of a sudden, people couldn't go to the cellar door and everybody wanted to run a virtual tasting. And so people learned to do live experiences using really low cost, what is now commonplace technology. And that has taken off so that people can taste wine at home and experience a visit with the winemaker or a virtual visit to a place, and then go. That just stimulates the desire to actually do it when they can. So I think all of these hero experiences, looking after customers, using digital technology effectively, these are the things that will drive a recovery, I believe.
Corrina and Peter, obviously things change in the pandemic. They're not all bad. One thing I'm wondering for you guys, I went to the Barossa recently and really noticed there was no bellies at the bar, stand-up wine tasting, and everybody's crowding in and, everybody's facing the barman, and the barman or lady is sort of facing everyone. It was sit down, you had to book in, which was great because I knew I had a spot at the table. It was much more convivial. You paid for a flight, which is fair enough, and there were discounts if you bought. Is that the way the industry is going? Are these some of the positives that are coming out of it?
Definitely. I mean, it was actually moving that way previously, to be honest, particularly to paid tastings and flights. And part of that is social responsibility with alcohol, having someone stand up to the bar and taste through your range of 10 wines is probably not really the best way to go about it. So that more hospitality type of service in the wineries, there was already a move to that. And I think probably COVID just sped that up. So, the booking platforms became much better. We actually put them in the first place, probably, which was probably helpful. And the expansion of those experiences. And I think a lot of the renovations or, building that's been happening in the regions has been sort of playing on that, giving people more space, creating more seated sort of hosting sort of experiences. Yeah. In which, people are learning a lot more about wine and, there's some amazing experiences out there at the moment.
I have noticed a few places took advantages of the early lockdowns to renovate, open a new tasting room, that sort of thing. But
we did exactly that.
Okay, terrific.
We had plans to move to the seated tasting early this year it would have been, but we just brought it forward during the lockdown last year, and we renovated our cellar door. And the great thing about moving to that seated model was when we came back, the government said you had to be seated to consume food and alcohol. Yep. So there was no need to explain to the customer why the change was in place. Yep. The government took care of that for us. But to Corrina's point, that experience then becomes a far more personal one with the customer. They get a better experience. There's more engagement. There's more connection. And they leave with a better understanding of what your winery and your wines are about. Whereas, like you say, the belly to the bar, someone leaning over the top filling a glass just isn't going to give you that sort of connection or experience.
I think also for the designated driver, it's much better to be seated and being part of the conversation than, trying to squeeze at the bar and join in. So,
and we're often in really beautiful spots as well, People want to be able to look out and see that, so.
Peter, Phil Hoffmann Travel was a big seller of dream cruises, from Meds to river cruises to you name it. You've been selling Murray River cruises in more recent times. I know you're selling some at the moment on Caledonia Sky in South Australian waters, a smaller ship, but a beautiful ship. But obviously this is the toe in the water to restart cruising. But we still don't have a pathway to restart cruising, which would bring people to cellar doors on day trips. Some of those tourism operators who benefited from those day trips are missing out. What's the pathway for return for cruising?
Yeah, correct, Brad. Yeah, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we were selling Rhine River cruises, and now, as you said, we're selling them, on the Murray. Nothing wrong with the Murray; it's fantastic. But we do need a pathway. And you're right, we've got Caledonian Sky. Really, the only cruising that can happen at the moment in Australia, because of the extension of the biosecurity period, the emergency period, is it's got to be an Australian flag carrying ship and carry under 100 passengers. So we've had Coral Expeditions, and we've got the APT Caledonian Sky in our waters, which is fantastic. And so they're doing some local cruising, going over to Kangaroo Island, Port Lincoln, and we've got some cruising out of Adelaide down to Tasmania, which will be fantastic. And that's proved really popular. So that's coming up over the next couple of months, which is terrific. And it gives us something to promote to our, clients that are just hanging out to do a cruise. And we have a lot of, crews on our database. But we do need a clear pathway, and CLEAR, which is the kind of the Australian arm of the International Cruising Association. Basically, they have set out a 4-stage or 4-phase restart that they'd like to see, and really it just needs to be endorsed by the government. And it really starts off, I guess the first phase is just agreeing on what those protocols, those health protocols that Roberta was talking about, that is so important to everyone so they know that they're going to be safe. The second phase is kind of the restart of domestic cruising for all ships, not just the expeditions, smaller style ships. So we're hoping to see that start straight after hopefully the end of the biosecurity, which is December 17. And so post-Christmas and maybe over the New Year period, just interstate cruising. So it'll be cruising from Queensland up and down the Queensland coast, coastal cruising, cruising out of New South Wales, cruising out of South Australia to regional areas. And then phase 3 is the extension, where we get to cruise a bit further afield, so probably New Zealand and maybe the South Pacific. And then finally, the last one, under, making sure that everything's working really well, a stage process, then opening up to international cruising, which is so important to South Australia. Again, 120 visitations only 2 or 3 years ago into Outer Harbour and Port Lincoln and KI and whatever. And that's, that brings millions and millions of dollars into the South Australian economy. And I think Australia-wide, it's a $5 billion exercise, and so it's massive. So the sooner we can get that up safely, it's very important to all.
With the long lead time for ships to come here and companies to plan, we've pretty much written off the coming cruise season though, international?
Yeah, so a lot of the cruise ships, unfortunately, during this cruise wave from October through to March, the traditional busy period, a lot of them just said too hard because the government have really not given them any pathway. So we get why the biosecurity emergency period has been extended. What we would have liked when the last one was extended from September 17 was them to say, okay, we're going to extend it for the next 3 months, but come December 18, this is how the restart is going to look. Now, that would have given a lot of the cruise lines time to make a decision either to come down or not to come down. So we've got 3 or 4 ships that are still kind of waiting on that. And unless a decision is made soon, I think they're going to float off north as well and maybe head up into Asia because, let's face it, the rest of the world is opening up with cruising and we're going to be really the last ones. So decisions have to be made and they have to be made very, very soon. Otherwise, that $5 billion economy just disappears again.
And Roberta, there's a lot of jobs involved in this, aren't there? There is day trips to wineries, day trips to all over the place. The guy driving the tour bus,
yes.
The port authority type people. There's big money involved.
Yes.
How important do you see getting a proper pathway going quickly?
It is really important, as Peter said, for all of those reasons and for all of the jobs. However, I think the government might be feeling, obviously can't speak for the government, but a little bit concerned because the last time we had a cruise ship come in, there was a lot of bad publicity around that. There was really bad impact from that. And people have a long memory now when it comes to these sorts of things, and they may be concerned about some backlash. I don't know. But I think as soon as we can get those ships back here, the better, obviously, because that also signals that Australia's open. Perception overseas now is that we've really put a shell over and said, do not enter. And ships coming in, increased airfare, air traffic, all of that stuff gives the perception that we're open for business. And you just don't get on the list of considered destinations if people think it's going to be too difficult or impossible to come here. So you have to, it's absolutely right. The government needs to put that pathway out there and give people some comfort and be able to plan.
Yeah, and I think the beauty is that we're learning because of the global restart of cruising. So they're doing a lot of the testing for us, which is great. So sometimes, being second fiddle is actually a good thing because there are learnings along the way. But what we are seeing is that they're doing an amazing job. And we know, because it's such a big industry, that the health protocols, the safety, the hygiene, and the innovation they've put through in the last 2 years, just like all of our businesses, in this down period, they've actually sat there and gone, okay, what have we done wrong in the past? What can we do to fix that? And, some of the cruise lines, they've got robotic cleaning happening at night time. It's quite amazing to see the innovation that is going out there. And of course, everyone that's cruising is vaccinated, double vaccinated. And so is the staff. So it's quite a sterile and clean environment on board. And I get what you're saying, Roberta, about, a bit of the stigma with cruising and the government worrying about that. But eventually they're going to have to do something about it. Absolutely. And so the time is now, otherwise we're going to literally miss the boat.
The early restart to cruising, we're used to big ships coming here full of foreign crews. The early restart in Australian waters, I take it it'll be Australian crews, so there's jobs there?
That's what's happening right now with the expedition-style cruising, but literally there would not be enough skills to fill those larger ships. So no, it will be fully vaccinated crew coming down from, the Philippines and India and essentially as it was before, but with a complete set of protocols around it.
Okay. Yeah, there's massive investments that they don't want to get wrong, aren't there?
Correct.
Maybe we can just fill the ships at the moment with wine and barrels to come back. At the moment, there's a lot of shipping blockages at the moment. We need some barrels to get here.
Exactly.
Roberta, this idea that how well COVID is managed overall, can I just circle back to that? That's sure. It's obviously important for internationals coming here, but it's going to be the same way for people planning a holiday overseas.
Absolutely.
And we talk about America being a country, 50 different countries sort of thing.
Yes.
It even gets down to that point, what part of a country you want to go to.
Yes, absolutely. And people will think about that because the United States is a place that's highly diverse. And it's very localized in terms of government. So what happens in Florida is not what happens in California and all the rest of those things, what happens in New York, etc. So people will be thinking about that and they will pick their destinations because there could be implications upon return, as has already been said, but also implications for people who might get ill away.
Yep.
And what that means. And I had already done, there's lots of research on it anyway. There are people who have concerns about health. There are certain places in the world they don't go because they don't want to go to the hospital there. They don't want to be treated by doctors there. And it's not an animosity or a racism thing. It's purely their perceptions of how well those places are infrastructured for health or infrastructured for many other things. I started this research when terrorism overseas was an issue. That's kind of been washed away, thank goodness, and replaced by what has become a much more powerful concern, and that is people's thinking about health for themselves, their family, implications for their work, what happens when they get home, all of those things. So planning a holiday is now much more complex than it was before, where you just thought about where you were going and what you were going to do. Now you've got to think about what happens to the people I travel with, what happens when I get home. And that's a lot of cognitive worry that people have to carry.
And just all come to South Australia.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly right.
Well,
All the problems.
That's right.
it's a great sales pitch.
That's right.
With flights overseas, would travel overseas, I'd imagine family reunions would be one of the top of the list. And I know there's pent-up demand, but do you expect some, like vaccine hesitancy, do you expect some travel hesitancy where people might just say, yeah, I really want to go and I've got the money, but I just might give it another 6 months?
Yeah, the first market to come back is that, visiting family and friends and reconnecting. Let's face it, people haven't seen each other sometimes for a couple of years. New Zealand, it was a classic case. When that travel bubble opened, we didn't see a mass amount of kind of tourism, as in people getting on tour coaches and big stays at lodges. They were actually going back and reconnecting with family and friends. And I think you have to get through that period first. We saw a lot of traffic going back and forth, but not a lot of, say, hotel stays and touring and things like that. I think you'll get a little bit of that, but I think the further you go afield, that if we talk about the long-haul travel to the US, UK, Canada, there will be some reconnection, but there are people that are just wanting a holiday.
Yeah.
And I think we're all like it. We're all ready to go and have that break. And I was saying off camera before that some of the, like the baby boomer market, they actually feel cheated because they haven't been able to go on a holiday overseas for a couple of years. They've got their money and they're coming in now and they're actually saying, you know what, Pete, we actually want to go and we're actually going to spend a bit more because we've actually had it sitting in the bank. So there's probably two sides to it, but definitely reconnection is probably first and foremost.
Would that be the same with maybe the young people, the backpackers, the kids who were going to take gap years, the fearless ones who say, well, I'll double vaccinated and I'm bulletproof anyway. Will they be ones jumping on early?
I think so. I've got two teenage sons at university and they were both going to do a gap year. And they haven't. One's in first, one's in second year. So I think they're going to fly the coop pretty well straight away.
Yep.
Because they want to go and do their Camp America. They want to do their Kentucky tours, and they feel that they've missed out.
And we talk about airline capacity. If we've only got worried about two of them, bit of a Dorothy Dixer sales pitch, I guess. But should people be looking to book a fair way out to make sure they do get a seat in a plane?
It's absolutely critical. We had some clients come in the other day to book to go to Europe. They're banking on that things are going to open and they want to get out there, and they were booking on Qatar Airways, and we had to really search around to try and get a reasonable fare at a reasonable time. Now, I'm hoping very soon that the 3 times a week that Qatar Airlines are flying out of Adelaide will soon turn to a daily flight, and then that will ease that demand-supply pressure on pricing. But again, it comes back down to the government to giving us a pathway and really living up to it. 80%, are they going to give us the freedoms that they're talking about? Now, Dan, the Tourism and Trade Minister, Dan Tehan, has actually said that's what's going to happen. You know, he's on record in the last couple of days. So is Josh Frydenberg. So we're really banking on that happening. We just need to see it happen now. And we need to get those vaccination rates up so we can all travel safely.
Roberta, do you think there's confidence in the wider community to book a holiday 6 months out to make sure you get a seat in a plane?
I think it depends on the segment. I think certainly the baby boomer segment, no problems. They're flexible with their time. They've got a bit of money. They and I think the airlines have been very good in terms of if something happens, you can.
Their conditions are very good at the moment.
Very good in terms of changing flights according to anything that could happen, and they'll need to keep that going for some considerable time, because if there's any risk at all that people are going to get caught as they did when the lockdowns first happened.
You need to take that barrier of sale away.
Exactly, because a lot of people lost a lot of money when they couldn't get refunds and stuff. So as soon as that, as long as those assurances are there, some segments will not feel it risky per se, and they don't need to worry about quarantining from work when they get home and all that. But for some segments who are traveling with families, let's say, perhaps where money's a bit tighter, we haven't really, as I've said, I don't think felt the full economic impact of COVID, post JobKeeper, post all these things. There's still some shakeout to go there. So I think it will depend on the traveller and what their circumstances are, and of course where they want to go.
I think the other segment that we really haven't talked about yet is the business and the corporate travel. And, we have quite a large part of our business is corporate. We look after Flinders University, and it's really sad to see what's happening with the international students not being able to come inbound, because it's so important to our economy. And it was a massive part of what we used to do is bring the students over. But we know with our corporate clients, they are keen to get overseas and visit their clients, especially if you're in some kind of sales role. And you'd know that with in your roles that you need to get over. And if we're going to sell to the US and we're going to sell to South Korea and new markets, we can all have these virtual kind of webinars and Zoom, but who's not over Zoom and Teams? I know I am. And sometimes just getting on a plane and face to face and having a glass of wine or a coffee or a beer with them, that's the way that Australians have done business traditionally. And I know a lot of our clients saying, hey, we are ready for that. So that's one market we feel that will come back fairly quickly. Again, the government have to say what are the restrictions on return, because they won't do it if they're going to be in a hotel quarantine for 14 days.
All right, I'm getting a bit of a wind up, but I just want to go quickly around the panel. I'm getting a sense that we've come through some dark days, but there's a lot of optimism in what you're saying for jobs, for recovery, for bounce back, for hopefully pathways coming into play. Andrew, you feeling good about the future?
Yeah, most definitely. We at a regional level, we've come off the best 12 months of tourism and visitation at the cellar door, up to this last lockdown, being supported by the local market very, very strongly. And to Corrina's point around the growth in direct-to-consumer sales, it's been exponential for wineries. And really the major challenge, I think, for the wine industry in terms of sales channels has really been what we call the on-premise, which is restaurants, cafes and hotels. And they're kind of the missing link. Retail has held up very well. Export, surprisingly, has held up quite well if you take China out of the equation. So it's how do we get markets open so those restaurants, cafes and hotels can start operating, because that's a significant, it's probably 30% of the domestic sales market. We need those people back. Okay,
Roberta, you're optimistic about jobs for the future, young people having a future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as has been mentioned in many different ways, there's been so many learnings that have come from this, and it's just not to forget those, but to leverage those and just keep them going. People that hadn't tried innovative things in the past, they've tried them, they work, they want to know more, they want to try more. And of course, young people will have all sorts of opportunities to go into lots of different jobs across the sector, and internationally once those opportunities present themselves. So, it's been a bit of tough times, but certainly we're in a great position to take the learning that's come from that and bounce back stronger, no question.
Peter, you feeling good?
Yeah, look, you have to take learnings from this. We've still got a bit of a bumpy road to go. I think for the next bit of time, 6 months, we need, as we've said several times, some clear pathways. But we've spent this time looking in and innovating within our own business. Over this period, we've built a convention centre on our rooftop at headquarters at Glenelg, because we know moving forward that we're going to be running a lot of these how-to presentations, because it is going to be more complex to travel. People are going to need to know about the health protocols and the certificates and things like that. So we've certainly done that, and we can't wait to pack that out with some destinational seminars and how-to seminars. The other thing we've set up is a virtual studio where we're doing virtual consulting. So for those people that are worried about coming in, we actually consult over a camera, and so we've innovated in those areas. But no, we're very buoyant about the future, but we do need a bit of help along the way, and so there's going to be a few more bumps, but that pent up demand, as long as we can get the supply back, it should be rosy, within 12 months.
All right, Corrina, feeling good?
Feeling okay. I think, no better time to get out to the regions at the moment. I mean, there's great experiences on offer. There is, we do make the best wine. So, there's always that. And, got great people to hang out with, who wouldn't want to get out to the regions. And also, staffing wise, anyone pretty much with two legs and two arms at the moment. We're missing pruners, we're missing vineyard hands, we're missing when vintage happens, there'll be cellar hands. We used to have lots of internationals that came out and filled those roles. So, it's a pretty exciting time. Who doesn't want to live down by the beach?
Terrific. All right, look, a big thank you to our panel, and thanks for the audience for joining us today. To keep the conversation going, use the hashtag Fearless Conversations on Twitter. We'll have more on this subject in tomorrow's Advertiser and a deep dive on what we've been discussing in the Sunday Mail. So enjoy our wonderful South Australian wines responsibly. Plan now for safe travels ahead, and good day.